Our pilgrimage to Tibet. Our first trip to Tibet, it was over, 20 years ago or so, was a life-changing event for me and for my family. Being asked by my Dharma teacher of many years to stop what I was doing, take a leave from my business, and simply go to Tibet, all within about a month, was mind-boggling to say the least. It turned my life upside down. Of course we would go. I had asked my teacher for years, in every interview, is there anything special that he wanted me to do? And always he had responded that I should just keep on practicing meditation, and so on. It had become so routine that there was nothing in particular that he wanted me to do, and then this, go to Tibet, and soon. And my wife and I could not just up and leave our kids. After all, we had never even had a babysitter in all those years, many, many years, and ultimately 21 years. And we had 4 kids, so that should tell you something. So of course we had to take the kids with us, at least 3 of them. One of them was in college, decided to stay home. So this is the story of our pilgrimage to Tibet to see the 17th Gyalwa Karmapa, Ogyen Trinley Dorje, who was the actual golden child that the movie The Golden Child was based on. In the process, we visited many of the sacred caves, monasteries, and other sacred areas in western Tibet. Margaret and I made a second trip to Tibet in 2004, this time accompanied by our teacher, the Venerable Khenpo Kata Rinpoche. But that's another story, so I hope you enjoy this one. Although it seems like some far-off dream, it was not that long ago that I was high in the mountains of Tibet at Serpu Monastery, the seat of the Karmapa and the Karmakaju lineage. And that's where I met His Holiness Ogyen Trinley Dorje, the 17th Gyalwa Karmapa. All of this is even more remarkable since my friends know that I hate airplanes and that I seldom travel far from my home in mid-Michigan. And although I've been interested in Buddhism for many years, I never seriously considered going to Tibet. Then suddenly, in less than a month, here I am in Tibet, along with my wife, my 2 daughters, and a young son. So how does such an event happen to a middle-aged businessman? Well, it happens when your Lama, your teacher, tells you to go to Tibet, and as soon as you can manage it. So here's our story. And I'll give you a little background just so you have it. My wife and I are long-time students of Khenpo Kata Rinpoche, and he's the abbot of KTD Monastery, Karma Triyana Dharma Chakri. Rinpoche was sent to the United States in the mid-1970s by His Holiness the 16th Karmapa, Rangjung Rigpe Dorje, to represent the Karmakaju lineage in the United States. Just as the Dalai Lama is the head of the Gelugpa sect of Tibetan Buddhism, so the Gyalwa Karmapa is the head of the Karmakaju lineage. And incidentally, the Karmapa's lineage, stemming from Marpa and Milarepa, is the older lineage. His Holiness the Karmapa represents the first Tulku, the first reincarnated Lama in the history of Tibet. All other reincarnations of this sort are subsequent to the Karmapas, including the Dalai Lama. It's the 14th Dalai Lama, but the 17th Karmapa. The Karmakaju lineage comes from the Adi Buddha Vajradhara, a celestial Buddha who imparted teachings to the Indian saint Tilopa, who in turn taught his student Naropa, also in India, and then Marpa, a Tibetan translator, traveled to India and received those same teachings from Naropa and brought them back to Tibet, where he then imparted them to his main student, Milarepa. And Milarepa is Tibetan's greatest yogi. Milarepa went on to teach his student Gempopa, who taught the first Karmapa, Dusum Kempa. So the entire line of the Karmapas, all 17 incarnations, has been formed by successive reincarnations of the same essence. In fact, the lineage today represents an unbroken chain of students and teachers culminating in the young 17th Karmapa, who at that time resided in Tibet. This Karmapa, as I mentioned earlier, is the reincarnation around which the movie The Golden Child was based. Over the last 20 years, Khenpo Rinpoche, our teacher, and another Rinpoche, Barter Rinpoche, have worked to build an extensive monastery complex near Woodstock, in the mountains above Woodstock, New York, upstate New York, including a vast shrine hall, an 11-foot gold Buddha, and even a traditional 3-year retreat center, one for men and another for women. A visit to the KTD monastery high on Meads Mountain is an unforgettable experience. It's beautiful. And each year we journey from our home in Michigan to KTD Monastery for a 10-day intensive teaching, one that Khenpo Katra Rinpoche offers to senior students. I think we're going into the 28th or 29th year now that we made the 1,600-mile round trip. But it's always a chance for students to practice, to spend time together, and to receive Rinpoche's teachings. Now, in recent years, Rinpoche has been giving, advanced teachings on Mahamudra. Mahamudra meditation is maybe the pinnacle of meditation in the Karma Kagyu lineage. And originally we went there because we as students weren't particularly ready for these teachings, but because, as Rinpoche puts it, if he is to teach this material, it will have to be now, due to his age. Today, this year, 2017, he's in his mid-90s. So this was written, this text that I'm talking to you through was written in 1997. During our stay at the monastery that year, in July of 1997, we had requested and received permission for a personal interview with Rinpoche. We always do that. They're short. During this interview, I outlined certain fairly severe business problems I'd been going through over the last year or two. Working with the translator, since Rinpoche speaks no English, I laid out my questions, and then Rinpoche began to answer. But after less than a minute, he just stopped. He looked at us and declared that he, himself, was not going to answer these questions any further. Instead, we should take these questions straight to His Holiness, the 17th Karmapa, and ask them of him directly. He said Karmapa would be able to answer our questions. Well, Margaret and I just looked at each other in amazement, because His Holiness could only be found at Serpu Monastery, deep in the reaches of Tibet at very high altitudes, 15,000 feet. So I mumbled something to Rinpoche about, maybe next year, perhaps next year, or next spring, or something. But Rinpoche said, no, this summer, as soon as you can arrange it. By this time, Khenpo Rinpoche had a great smile on his face, as if he were very, very happy for us. We were speechless. He then went on to speak about impermanence and about how short life is, how none of us know the time or manner of our death. And here he was directing us to go to Tibet soon, like this very summer, within a month. Well, talk about turning your world upside down. Me go to Tibet? What a novel idea. I almost never traveled and never, ever had seriously thought of going to Tibet. I had always said, a little smugly, and I confess that I was interested in the Buddhism in Tibetan Buddhism and not particularly in the Tibetan culture. Anyway, I left that interview in a daze, my head just spinning, but also knowing that I had better go home and pack my bags. Rinpoche wants us to go to Tibet, I mused. For years I had worked with Khenpo Rinpoche, and each year during our personal interview I would always ask him, Rinpoche, is there anything particular I should be doing? And aside from encouraging me to keep practicing, he never gave me any other specific directions. I was always just a little disappointed there was never anything more he wanted me to do. And now this. Rinpoche just told me to go to Tibet right away this summer, and it was already mid-July. So after the surprise kind of cleared away, Margaret and I looked at each other. We knew we were pumped. We knew we were going to Tibet. In fact, we were so charged that we went up and climbed to the top of the local mountain that same night, something we had never done in all the years we had been coming to the monastery. Starting at about 7 p.m., with the sun already dimming, most of my family climbed to the top, and from there we surveyed the valley in the distance below us, with by that time, all the twinkling lights. We came down later from the mountain in complete darkness. Our heads were right. We were good to go, and when we returned from the teachings to Michigan, we managed to prepare and take off within a month of this directive from Rinpoche. Although from that very first day, we were already as good as gone, to Tibet. Now, getting ready to go is a whole nother deal. All I can say is what a busy time it was. Suddenly we had everything to do and little time to do it in. The first thing we did was attempt to book tickets within a month. And in that same short time, we also had to get passports, visas, apply for visas, arrange a tour, receive all kinds of inoculations, and on and on. Although we made expensive airline reservations right off, trying to book inexpensive tickets took weeks of finagling. What a lot of time was wasted waiting for those long-shot, cheap tickets to clear. In the end, we just gave up, and we paid the going rate, which was about $2,000 a person from here to Kathmandu. Passports were also available in either slow or expedited form. And here, too, we had to pay extra to expedite the process. And even then, they only came through just in time. And as far as passports go, you need up-to-date birth certificates to get them. The ones with a special imprinted seal on them. And it turns out that some of our actual birth certificates from when we were born, while good years ago, no longer measured up to these specs. And this was a problem and precipitated a frantic search and, of course, extra fees to get fresh copies of what we already had and have these new ones overnighted to us. The passport people just held up everything until they got exactly the birth certificates they required. Even though I had the one my mother left with me, with my little baby footprints and everything. That's not good enough. Inoculations were another mini drama, all by themselves. What shots to get? What shots could we dare ignore? What about the wisdom of getting shots at all? So we pulled all the information we could get from books, from the internet and the local doctors. We began calling disease control centers and national experts. And one thing is for certain, few people know the whole story about immunizations, the ones that you need in order to travel to other countries, including most doctors. And most local doctors believe that they know the facts, but they don't. And we were on a tighter schedule as well because of the fact that our 11-year-old had not gotten all of his shots as a kid. So somehow we all managed to get all of the shots we needed. I believe I got 5 or 6 in one fine day. Some of us got sick from them. I mean, not bad sick, just, not feeling so good. And visas we left up to the tour guide in Kathmandu, although we poked around on the internet and scared ourselves good a couple of times. As for the itinerary, this was pretty much left up to me, and aside from the shelf of books that I bought on Tibet, on India, and Nepal, I had access to a couple of Sangha members, other Buddhists with experience in Tibet. So forget about me watching the latest movies during that time. Every night found me burning the midnight oil, trying to figure out a million angles. Let's see, there was the Tibetan language that I didn't know, the medical supplies, the trekking equipment, the pilgrimage spots that we would visit, the maps to find about how to get there, the clothing, and so on, the works. And speaking of the Tibetan language, I used a few books, I took them apart and made kind of like laminated sheets for each member of our group. Put them on a pocket-sized sheet, and I listed all the most important phrases that we would need, everything from "please help me" to, "where's the bathroom?" Then on a second double-sided laminate, I put all the elements of Tibetan grammar, plus hundreds of major verbs and nouns, everything we might need in order to piece together sentences. And this took quite a lot of time because I was kind of learning as I go. And I had to digest it first in order to even condense it. As for a list of what to take, I collated what I thought would be necessary from the books, the ones that I had. And from what I heard of the experiences of several Sangha members, I took from that, people who had already been there. So that's kind of the idea. And from those who had more experience from me, a friend of mine, Andy Quintland and Ward Holmes, both who have been Tibetan guides themselves on occasion, we received invaluable and much needed help. And it was Andy who helped us set up the tour. And in Kathmandu, Gloria Jones, who lives in Kathmandu, helped us in so many ways, particularly once we were actually in Kathmandu. She was always ready to help us when we needed her. And their notes included things like, you can't bring enough Kleenex, and don't forget the tux pads. And I boiled all of these lists down into a master list of items for us to consider, a list promptly ridiculed by my 21-year-old daughter who was coming along. She felt she would just bring what she wanted to bring. So the list is posted elsewhere in the story. I won't be reading it in this, podcast. And I made many trips to Kmart, to Walmart with my list in hand, snagging various items as they presented themselves to me, just walking down the aisles. As I thought of them, boy, I have to have that. And my wife, who favors homeopathic and natural remedies, worked on that end, while I made sure we had all of the allopathic items, the regular doctor stuff that would at least address symptoms. I collected things like laxatives and diarrhea medicine and antihistamines, all the things we love to hate until we need them. And as for clothing, we soon discovered that most of the old standard mail-order catalogs, which used to carry good outdoor wear, had kind of upscaled and now carried more preppy clothes than clothes of real substance. Even good old L.L. Bean was now selling, dog beds and Christmas wreaths and looking more and more like a J.C. Penney's catalog. So this forced us to turn to items, to various hiking catalogs such as, Patagonia and Marmot, and to whatever expedition or outfitter stores we could find. In fact, it was kind of fun to go into some of these stores trying to find stuff, and, the local store cliff jockey, who was, a climber, would be telling us about the advantages of this or that, these socks, this combination. And he says, well, where are you going to be hiking? And we got to answer, Tibet. And I just watched their eyes bug out despite their best efforts at self-control. Not that we were going to do all that much climbing. In fact, when it came to hiking and camping gear, we really did get a little sidetracked. My wife, I believe, ordered some 10 different pairs of hiking boots, 9 of which she sent back. it took weeks to figure out the boot angle, to figure out what boots, and it turned out she only went hiking once. I settled for a pair of comfortable Nike hiking boots, rather than the more uncomfortable real thing, the real boots. But they worked just fine for the 2 times I really hiked. And socks, we all had to have those $14 a pair hiking socks, which were in fact worth, I still wear them. I wear Thurlows, and they last for 10, 15 years, and they're absolutely great. Plus we had like metal mirrors, mosquito head nets, Swiss Army knives, candles, flashlights, waterproof matches, hidden money pouches, Nalgene water bottles, and on and on. And the only things we didn't take were like secret decoder rings and Ovaltine labels. So those of you that are old enough to even know what that is. So mostly I spent those late nights working on the itinerary for our Tibetan journey. And as I did not have a detailed map of Tibet available to me, I photocopied tiny sections of maps from Victor Chan's Tibet Handbook, piecing these together to create one large map of the areas we were planning to visit. Then with books in hand, I read and plotted out a path that I hoped that we could follow. Of course, the central point in our journey was to visit Sirpu Monastery. That's the home of His Holiness, the 17th Karmapa. Everything else after that was gravy. So it was a high-energy time. All of those weeks preparing for the trip, we had like visions of Tibet, dance through our heads. Now, the reaction of my family to the trip was mixed, and it kind of changed with the weather. Most were against it right off, especially since they knew I wanted them to go, and they weren't really being given a choice. I can't say that I blamed them. Our 11-year-old was loath to give up his friends and habits and have to go anywhere. And it's pretty much the same response came from our 15-year-old, May. My 21-year-old daughter was more game, but she didn't really say yes until Khenpo Rinpoche, our teacher, looked her dead in the eye and said she should go. Then she said, okay. As for my wife, she went back and forth from being good to go to declaring she just might not go at all. In the end, everyone happily got on board the plane. Not one of us ever regretted the decision to go. It's a major factor in our life. And the nightmare of tickets and passports and visas and airport taxes, immigration, customs, and all of that, I'm going to spare you. I've told you enough. I'm going to spare you the rest of it. Although I am sure that I could save any of you who are even thinking of going some suffering by giving you these details. Suffice it to say that each of these many obstacles appeared formidable at times. But we sweated and clawed our way through each and every one. And there were a lot of them. For example, when we were dropped off at the airport at the beginning of our trip with all our baggage, a ton of baggage, we found out that our flight had been canceled due to a large storm in Chicago. I mean, all flights were off. So there we were, some 50 miles from home, at the back of block-long lines of angry flyers trying to chaperone our little 6-foot pile high of baggage. And our ride home was gone. It dropped us off and left. So we tried everything, every way we could think of to get to Chicago. That was where our overseas flight was scheduled to go take off from. So we even tried to rent a car and drive to Chicago, but we had too much luggage for one car and for that long a drive, and the time was short. In the end, there was nothing we could do but rent the largest car they had and stuff all our gear and ourselves into it and drive the hour back to our hometown where we would wait, for a flight the following day. So talk about anticlimactic. We kind of slunk back into town and didn't even tell anyone we were back. And we kind of pretended we were not home for 24 hours. We hardly spoke to one another, but just kind of held our breath and waited for the time to pass. Up early the next day, we caught that plane to Chicago, and from there the one to Tokyo, and then to Hong Kong, and then to Kathmandu, until we were finally on board the 1-hour flight from Kathmandu to Lhasa in Tibet. There we were, high in the sky over Tibet, gazing at Mount Everest. but I'm getting ahead of myself. To be continued.